Our final distinguished guest in this panel is David WHETHAM, Professor of Ethics and the Military Profession and Director of the King's Centre for Military Ethics at the King's College London. A prolific author, his latest book with co-authors published by Cambridge University Press was titled The Ethics of Special Ops, Raids, Recoveries, Reconnaissance and Rebels. Professor WHETHAM worked as a BBC researcher and also with the OSCE in Kosovo, and has played a formative role in military ethics education in the US, Britain, Australia, the rest of the world, and most recently Ukraine. His lectures will enable us to understand the significance of ethics on the field, as its title is Helping the Helpers, Teaching Military Ethics to Ukrainian Chaplains. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to use this speaker, if that's all right. It's before lunch. It's a little bit low energy, so let's make sure we pick it up a bit. Great pleasure to be here. I was last here 3 years ago for a military ethics conference, and it is just as beautiful as it was then. I'm enormously privileged to do what I do. I'm not in the military, but for 23 years I've taught the military. I teach 3,000 military officers a year at the UK Defence Academy, and I also teach up to 60 different nationalities of officers that come through here. I'm also asked to teach around the world. I help with curricular development and ethics education in military institutions all the way around the world. And the good thing about being a civilian is I can be asked to go, but I can never be told. So that's a good thing for me, being a professor. That's an incredibly rich experience. The main thing that I'm interested in is the practical side. What actually works? How do you get people to do the right thing? That's been the focus of my professional life for the last over 2 decades now. Military ethics is a lot broader than many people think. Those in the military understand how broad the topic is. It's not just about killing people. I think it's useful to think about it in 3 related areas. The individual in the profession is the rules, the values, the standards that people are expected in different organizations in different parts of the world. They're all expected to live up to certain standards. All of those different organizations use different words to describe those values. The Australian Defence Force is different to the US Marine Corps, is different to the Hungarian Armed Forces. However, if you actually look at what they're saying, it's very, very similar. In fact, it's almost identical to what Aristotle would have talked about as the martial virtues over 2,000 years ago. And there's a reason for that. There's certain things that you need to do as part of a professional armed force. There are certain values, virtues, if you like, that you are expected to uphold. So the first part is that you as an individual in the armed forces, what do you need to do? What do you need to look like? The second is the profession at work. This is things like the law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, understanding things like the just war tradition and how that relates to you and your organization and your country. The final area is the bit that gets the least attention, but is in fact probably the most important because it underpins everything else. It's the relationship between you as a military and the society that you serve. What you can be legitimately asked to do and what you must say no to. It's that covenant between society and those that protect it. And that protection role is absolutely essential, and you'll find that all the way through Catholic doctrine as well. Augustine and Aquinas in particular, very, very clear on this, the role in protecting society as a justification for having an armed force in the first place. This is the 3 areas of military ethics. They intertwine, they overlap, but that's the 3 broad areas. Why don't we just rely on law? Get asked this a lot. Why do I have a philosopher involved here? Why not just get the JAG in? Why not just have the lawyer do it? That's because we're doing different things. Law and ethics are complementary. They are very important to consider together, but then law on its own is not enough. The law will tell you what you are permitted to do. Ethics is about what you should do. Now, that should be within the law, but the law the law of armed conflict is incredibly permissive. It will allow you to do terrible, terrible things within the law. That doesn't mean that you should do them, though. That's where military ethics comes in. So they are complementary. They must be seen together. Both are important. Why do we consider this important for our armed forces? Well, ultimately, in just war tradition, here's a few examples from Russian sources seeking to undermine the Ukrainian state. Very simply, if Russia is successful in undermining the legitimacy of Ukrainians' efforts to defend herself, then they will lose the international support that they have at the moment. Legitimacy is absolutely essential, and one of the ways that you maintain legitimacy is by adhering to military ethics, just war tradition principles, but also upholding the values that I've just talked about. It's absolutely essential. An area that has become increasingly important over the last 20 years that was not considered 20 years ago when I started out as a military ethicist was not just what it means for your country to behave in an ethical manner or your armed forces, but what it means for the people in the armed forces. So today we're becoming increasingly aware that the suicide rate in our veteran community is appalling, and that's a universal thing around the world. Suicide rate amongst serving military professionals is 10 years, 20 years, 30 years after they have served is absolutely horrendous. And there is no country in which this is not the case. We are now linking this not just to PTSD, not just to physical trauma, but the idea of moral injury. That is, people having to try and come to terms with when they did something that perhaps they realized wasn't the right thing to do, and then spend the rest of their lives thinking about it. Or perhaps being put into situations where they're forced to do the wrong thing, and a betrayal of trust by their organization. We are now understanding that moral injury is linked to that self-harm, that the suicidal ideation in a much stronger way than we had previously understood. And I think General Mattock's point about healing the man before you can heal the world is very pertinent to this. So what does this mean for military ethics? Well, part of this is formed by getting things wrong, doing things against military ethics, doing things against what you're supposed to do. What can we do about this? Well, one of the ways that you can stop people from doing the wrong thing is by armoring them, ethical armoring. We do character development. Every country around the world concentrates on the character of the people in their armed forces, but we also are increasingly aware of the power of the environment. War is an incredibly corrosive environment, morally, physically, spiritually. It's very hard to do the right thing in this situation. The International Committee of the Red Cross did a fantastic report in 2018, which I recommend highly. Instead of, it spent 150 years trying to understand why people don't stick to the rules. This report was different. This report looked at why does anybody stick to the rules in war? War is such a chaotic, corrosive environment. Why would anybody adhere to rules in war? And this study is about why they would do that. And it really comes down to the difference between countries that manage to adhere to the law of armed conflict and uphold military ethics and those that don't, are those that have strong organizational cultures. An organizational culture in which it is not what should I do in this situation, but it is ingrained in the person, what do we do in this situation? It's the we, being part of an organization where you are confident enough in its values and its ethos that you know what we do. We will do this, the right thing in this situation. That's what it comes down to. So how do you do this? How do you create an organization, a military with a strong organizational culture? Well, what comes out very, very clearly is it's not down to people like me standing in front of a military class once a year and giving them a lecture and PowerPoint. That's not how you change values. It's not how you change organizations. Values in an organization are spread across. It doesn't matter how many times you stand as the head of an organization and tell them what they must do. That is not how an organization changes behaviors. It spreads values across from peer to peer. How do you do this? Well, one of the ways that you can do this is by understanding this and integrating it into all of your training and education activities. The challenge that the Ukrainian armed forces have, they have many, of course, but in this particular area is that you are expecting people with absolutely no military training to be trained up and then put into the front line very quickly. They're not having years of education and training before being deployed. It's a very, very limited amount of time. The focus that they do have is very rarely on military ethics or even international humanitarian law or the law of armed conflict. There are essential briefings in that, absolutely, and very clearly delivered by very, very good people. But it's only a small part of that training. Plus, a lot of that training is delivered overseas, which in a sense of you want people to understand what we do, that's very hard because that sounds like other people's values that you're being taught there. So how do you change this perception? How do you socialize the common values through an organization? And this, of course, is where the Ukrainian chaplaincy is uniquely positioned. It's a very new organization. It's now got well over 300 chaplains of various denominations working with it, starting with volunteers after the initial invasion in 2014 and then formalized into military structures from 2022. They have a number of different roles, but the key bit is that those chaplains are integrated with the units. They are there all the time. They are sharing the risks of the people at the front line. They are therefore in a unique position to shape organizational culture. It's been my great privilege to be involved in teaching 5 different cohorts of Ukrainian chaplains when they come over to the UK as part of Operation Interflex, which is the United Kingdom's support to the defense of Ukraine. One of the challenges that the Ukrainian chaplains are faced with is none of them had any military experience before 2022. None. Absolutely nothing. And none of them had thought about things like military ethics. Not religious ethics, but military ethics before. So where do you start? You're now being used as a resource by your unit commanders, by the people within those units, and your part of your job is to look after the spiritual and moral well-being of your units. How do you do this? How do you actually start? And that's not an easy thing to do. It takes a long time to become a very good military ethicist. So how do you do this? What tools can we provide? People are nervous about even engaging in the topic of ethics because so many people think all of the answers are relative. They're not. There might be lots of good answers, but there's also wrong answers. There's categorical wrong answers which are recognized as wrong no matter who you ask, interestingly. So, what tools can we provide? Well, back in 2015, we recognized in the UK that there was a gap. There was a shortage of quality materials to just get people talking about ethics. I'm not talking about volumes of books. I'm not talking about books and books of doctrine. I'm talking about tools that everyday people can use all the time, outside of the classroom, getting ethics out of the classroom. So we developed a pack of playing cards because the military love playing cards. It's very, very straight. This was a philosopher's response to the cards of death, if anybody can remember, from the first Gulf War, where Saddam Hussein was the ace of spades. Anybody remember those? This is a philosopher's response, slightly more ethical, I hope. Please take one and pass them on. So the idea here is that each of the cards has a question, a prompt, which is just designed to get you to start talking about ethics, start thinking about it. Now, the only thing worse than not doing ethics education is doing it badly. So where do you go for the answers? On the back of each card, there is a QR code, which if you scan, takes it through to an answer. A way of thinking about the right way to answer the question. What would be the right response or a legitimate response? Got the other side of the room. Please, take one, pass them on. There's talking heads on there with people reflecting on their own experience of what happened when they were faced with that challenge and what they did about it. So if you are now the chaplain faced in that situation of, I don't even know how to start this conversation, fine, pick the 5 of clubs. Let's all have a look at the question and then decide, what would you do in this situation? How would you deal with this? And you've started the discussion. You've started the sharing of the values across the organization. This is not a substitute for all of the other ways that you can influence an organization. It's just a tool. But we know it's a very, very effective tool. It's now in 15 different languages, including Ukrainian. It's also in Russian. Unfortunately, very few downloads in Russian, for whatever reasons. But it is used by professional armed forces around the world now. It's had excellent peer review. The results have been published in multiple journals. It is very good for raising awareness and for getting people aware of the type of work that is necessary with their own organizations. We launched an app, so you don't even have to have the physical card. You can download this for free. The app is in all 15 languages. Anybody can download it. And there is a medical version as well, because military medics are faced with horrendous challenges in the field. So this isn't something that you are faced with a challenge and you look it up. It's part of the background, part of the thinking of, on a Friday, which card should we discuss today? It's part of that general socialization discussion. I'm delighted that Kyiv has requested many hundreds of decks of this. There's 3,000 packs currently being used on the front line. It was the psychologists in particular who were calling for the cards. They had seen them being used in other countries and they wanted to use them with the troops that are rotating out of theatre for their 2 weeks respite. And having the cards is just an easy way of getting people to open up about the profound ethical challenges that they've been faced with. Ultimately, by getting military ethics right, by making sure it is integrated and fully understood across an organization so that the organization culture itself recognizes and responds, ultimately this is one of the ways where you can focus on what happens afterwards, what happens to your society, but also what happens to the relationship with the party that you are currently in conflict with. A lot of focus is spent in international affairs on conflict termination, stopping people fighting. But as we heard from the last presentation, the key is not just getting to people to stop fighting. It's not conflict termination, it's conflict resolution. And you can only get from conflict termination to conflict resolution if you understand that what you do in a conflict has a profound effect on what happens to the peace afterwards as well. Thank you very much.